Welcome to another episode of the Pre-Zero Sports Talk podcast. The following is a conversation with Scott Morris, a visionary leader who has redefined the intersection of AI and workplace leadership. From his role as Chief People Officer to establishing and creating Propulsion AI, Scott has been at the forefront of innovation. He helps leaders navigate hiring, retention, and engagement in an AI-driven world, believe it or not. Today, we're going beyond the buzzwords, talking about real solutions, challenges, and the future of work. I'm your host, Sid Bansala. Let's dive in. Scott, welcome to the show.
Sid, I have been so excited to join you on the program. I'm honored by the invitation. That was quite an introduction, so I hope I live up to that. Thank you for having me.
Take us back, Scott. What was the defining moment that pushed you from a career in HR leadership to launching Propulsion AI?
Yeah, I wish I could tell you a great story about successes that I had and how that propelled me to more success. But the reality is it was a failure more than a success that drove me to do it. I've spent 25 years in the profession of people operations of HR, and about 20 of those in a C-level role. And in that capacity, I coach managers and I, talk to individuals that we're bringing into the organizations, and I look for fit. And yet I found myself in my last corporate assignment in an environment where I just didn't fit. And I always feel like I have to qualify that word fit, because I don't mean, when I use that term, I don't mean fit in. I mean fit in the sense that there are organizations, and I'm sure a lot of members of the audience and yourself have experienced this. In certain organizations, you've never had to pick your words. The communication just felt natural. The way you communicated felt natural to the organization. Its communication style felt natural to you. The things that you wanted to focus on felt like the right things. Even when you have a hard day, you don't go home and say, I'm going to quit. You say it's a hard day, but I'm very invested in the work. Those are hallmarks of fit in an organization. And that fit is so critical, not only to productivity, but to personal and professional satisfaction. And I found myself in a situation where all of those fit factors were wrong. And when you look at this, and I started as a result of that failure, I started to look at the causes of this lack of fit and the costs of this lack of fit. And there are a bunch of different people that estimate differently, but the best information I can find, the price tag for that lack of fit is about $1.1 trillion globally. And that's a pretty significant number. But there are costs that are harder to calculate that go beyond the financial costs. I will tell you, at the end of my first year in this organization, I went to my boss and I said, this is just not working out. And he said, well, good, because it's not working out for me either, and I think we should part ways. And we did it amicably, but it took a toll on me personally, mental health and physical health, and this sense that somehow, and the narrative I had for myself, was I a fraud? Was I somehow less of a valued professional because I had made the choices that I made and gotten myself into a situation where I didn't fit, right? Those costs are harder to calculate, but they're equally significant. And so that, combined with the fact that for 20 years of buying software, my perspective was always that the software was made by smart software people, but people who had never really solved the problems that I needed solved. So you take those two things and you combine them, and I guess maybe I had a psychotic break, but I came to this belief that I could just do it differently and I could do it better, and I could create real impact, not only for organizations, but for individuals.
How did your experience as a Chief People Officer shape your vision for leveraging AI in a workplace?
There are two kinds of Chief People Officers, I think, Sid, and I hate to boil the world down to simplest terms, but there are Chief People Officers whose primary focus is compliance and regulation and risk management, and I don't disrespect that. There is a significance and importance to that. But there are also Chief People Officers whose focus is productivity and engagement and trying to create workplaces where the organization is advancing through its people. And that's definitely my mindset. And so, one of the things that as a leader in the organization, I always tried to focus myself outside of HR. My first and foremost focus was, what is the organization trying to do, and what does it need to do in order to accomplish those results that are driving the organization forward? And then, as a secondary, I was asking myself the question, how are we going to leverage and utilize our human assets in order to accomplish those ends? So I think, for me, my work as a chief people officer was very much defined by by the business objectives. And I think that colors a lot of what we're trying to do in my company, Propulsion AI. We're trying to broaden that focus for others.
What was your biggest misconception about being a founder before you made the leap?
Oh gosh. I've made every mistake I think a founder could make. I don't think I appreciated the emotional roller coaster that being a founder delivers. In part because, for a certain amount of time as a founder, you sit alone in a room and you're all by yourself. I mean, if you have a co-founder, maybe you're having that interaction, but you sit alone and you think thoughts alone, and you miss out on something that's really important. And I would describe it as a feedback loop. When you work in an organization, you do something, and there are other people that are there that give you feedback. It was a good idea. It wasn't a good idea, right? When you're a founder, you lose that feedback loop. And so every decision you make, you're making with only, the inputs that you can cobble together, but there aren't frequently people telling you things. Second aspect of that feedback loop is, in an organization that is a formed organization, you frequently get to see other indicators of decision success, whether that decision was a good decision or a bad decision. When you're creating a company, they don't exist yet. And so there is a faith that you have to invest, and a belief in your ultimate sort of endpoint that you have envisioned, that you're headed down this right path, because you don't get a lot of reinforcement to it. I think I totally misjudged how lonely that process is, and how stressful that process is, because at the end of the day, you are the only one. There is nobody to blame. There is nobody to point the finger at. There is only you for every decision, every single day.
And Scott, did you follow the classic standard structure when it came to starting a business, meaning from an idea to let me craft the value proposition, to let me search who are my clients or my future clients, to work towards, together with an investment, towards a product market fit, testing that product, doing the MVP, investing on the MVP, getting the result, trying to get the feedback, and then you move on? Or your approach was different? How was it, beside of being alone? And
Yeah, I mean, never having done it before, I'm a first-time founder. And so, I know what I was able to research about how you were supposed to do these things. And I use air quotes because I don't think there's one sort of path that every founder follows, right? But we did start out, I rely heavily on my 25 years of experience. And in part, I've worked in organizations as large as 15,000. I've been in organizations as small as 250. And I think the value of that is that not only do, in a C-level role, obviously you're expected to steer strategy and to envision kind of the future. But in a small organization, nobody cares what your title is, and they shouldn't. Everybody rolls up their sleeves. Everybody does the frontline work. And so I'm thankful for that experience, and we relied heavily on that. But we also put together, a group of over 100 chief people officers and talent leaders and recruiters and HR business partners. And we tried to learn from their experiences and the things that were challenging for them and challenging for the populations that they served. And so I do think we followed some of the early steps of doing that research and trying to understand, where the market was going to respond positively and where we had the opportunity to really fill in gaps in the market. And we think we found them. But I will also be honest that we're still in the process of testing product market fit. And another lesson that I've learned as a founder is that we think of these things sometimes as destinations as endpoints, like, do you have product market fit? And, I think the reality is you're constantly refining your perspective on what product market fit is.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. Scott, AI in HR and leadership. What's the biggest myth companies must stop believing?
That AI is going to take their job. I think when we get into this, it's easy when we have a fear mentality to see the world in negative terms. I see the world in very positive terms, and in part because I use history as a guide. And if we go back to 1967, I wasn't alive for this, but there was a huge product release in 1967. It was done by Texas Instruments. And do you know what it was?
67. It
was the calculator.
Okay. Yeah.
It was the calculator. And at the time that this came out, like, this was groundbreaking, right? It was an electronic device that was doing what had been done by hand. And there was this huge fear that the calculator was going to replace bookkeepers. And we know now historically with context that didn't happen. Now, fast forward to 1983, and the Lotus Corporation releases 123, which was an early precursor, green screen spreadsheet product. But there was a similar fear reaction, and that was that it was this product, this spreadsheet, was going to put financial professionals out of business. And it didn't. In fact, it did just the opposite. It allowed financial professionals to contribute so much more than they had in the past. But what they had to do was release the concept of how they had delivered value previously and embrace how they were going to deliver value in the future. And I think that's an important historical example. The way that financial professionals used to, pre-spreadsheet, deliver value was through calculations. And the way that they evolved was to deliver value through analysis and strategy. And that marked an inflection point. And I think we're at that similar kind of inflection point today with artificial intelligence. But it's going to require that, in this case, and to your point of your question, for HR professionals, that we release ways that we have previously delivered value and embrace new ways that we will deliver value using a new tool set. So I don't think, I have a very positive outlook. I don't think AI is going to take anybody's job, but I do think that people who embrace technologies are going to outpace those who don't. And there may be some job shuffling in that mix.
How should leaders think about AI based on what you just explained now? Not as a replacement, but as, let's say, I don't know, an augmentation.
Yeah, that's a great word, Sid. And I think, there are some places where it's totally reasonable to look to artificial intelligence as a handoff. But when it comes to HR and matters of human capital and thinking about workforce productivity, I think a big mistake that leaders are making is looking for ways that they can hand off those tasks. And I believe the reality is we need human-in-the-loop systems that allow us to draw the very best out of technology that we can draw and augment, and this is why I like your word, augment the expertise that comes from humans. Artificial intelligence is still not as good as human beings are at reasoning and at relationships. And we want to draw on the humans for those. But I think, finding a balance and being really thoughtful about where you're handing off versus where you are involving artificial intelligence is a key consideration for leaders.
For the listeners, Scott, can you share a story, let's say a success story, a company that effectively integrated AI in hiring or talent management?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a company, one of our very first, called Form Energy. They're a next generation battery company operating out of West Virginia here in the United States. And they were building a manufacturing plant. And they incorporated our tool. They were one of our very first customers. And one of the reasons that they told us that it was important to them was that they wanted to help shift the mental model that their managers used when putting members on their teams. Here's the shift. Most of us are really, really bad at designing roles. We are very, very good at identifying tasks. I look at my workload and I say, this fire is on my desk and I don't want to deal with this anymore. So I need to hire somebody and I want them to do that task. or, this thing needs to get done or that thing needs to get done. And here's the reality. When I load a job with tasks, that is not very engaging. Worse yet, it does not encourage initiative. It encourages people to stay in the box, to do what they're told. And that doesn't lead to resilience or nimbleness within the team. And so if I am designing roles and all I can do is articulate tasks and say, these are the things that you are, the things you got to come in and do every day, I am setting myself up as a leader for having to micromanage that situation. I now have to ensure, if I say you've got to do these 3 things, I have to ensure those 3 things get done. Now, the converse, and this is where Form Energy was thinking, they wanted to set up the situation focused on outcomes. They wanted to encourage initiative and accountability and reduce the need of their managers to micromanage the people, because what they wanted their managers to keep their eye on was the big picture results. And so here's the difference. Let's say that we're creating a role for an accountant. And actually, you know what? Let me use a sports analogy here, just to even though Form Energy doesn't do it. I know the audience is very concerned with sports, right? Let's say that we're hiring a strength and conditioning coach. If you were to write a job description for that strength and conditioning coach, a reasonable thing that you might write in is conduct daily weight room sessions with athletes. That is a task. And it's equivalent to, tasks in any other organization, right? And you have to ask yourself, why do you care about that? Why do you care that that activity gets done? Because is it enough that I come in, I'm the coach, I come in and I run the session? The answer should be no, that doesn't matter unless something changes as a result of me conducting those sessions. So instead of saying, conduct weight room sessions, if I flip that mental model and I say, okay, the outcome that I want is to improve athletes' functional strength or to reduce non-contact soft tissue injuries, right? Those are measurable outcomes and they are connected to the organization's success. So rather than framing my thinking in terms of the task, I frame it in terms of the outcome. Now, what I set that up for, or what I set the individual in the role up for, is the outcome is not negotiable. This is what we need to get to. And it becomes even more powerful when I put a number to it. So I say improve athletes' functional strength metrics by 15%. Okay, now the individual in that role now is able to take accountability. And they're able to say to me, as the head coach, okay, if that's what you want, I need to do those weight room sessions, but I probably also need to do these other things. And then I say, of course, yes, do those things, right? That's the accountability. That's what Form Energy was looking for. That's what most of our customers are telling us that they want. And that's why they like the platform. The platform encourages a manager to engage in that kind of thinking and in fact provokes their thinking and leads them through that process.
Lovely. You've spoken about $1 trillion impact of disengaged employees. What's the most significant factor driving disengagement today, Scott?
Well, the $1.1 trillion price tag globally relates to a lot of different things. It relates to engagement, it relates to productivity, it relates to turnover costs, etc. And ultimately, they all come back to this concept of lack of fit. Now, when we think about engagement, Gallup, the Gallup organization, does a survey every year that is a global survey of employee engagement. And their most recent finding for 2024, which was just recently published, suggests that only about 31% of the world's working population is fully engaged. That leaves 69% that are somewhere on the disengaged spectrum. Now, what causes that disengagement? We think a strong component, a leading component, is work that is actually interesting. There's a book I have on the bookshelf behind me from an author named Daniel Pink. And the book is Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. And there are 3 sort of meta findings that he has about engagement and motivation. And they are mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And I think one of the causal factors of the lack of engagement is how we're designing jobs. Back to my task example, right? If I tell you your job is to come in and stand around in the weight room, that is less engaging than you are doing something important by moving functional strength metrics. In a corporate context, if I tell you your job as an accountant is to, follow up on delinquent reports rather than the outcome, your job is to move days outstanding from 50 days to 25, right? There's a different level of engagement and purpose that comes from an outcomes focus rather than a task focus. And I think we've, in the US most definitely, and globally, we've gotten into this focus on tasks rather than outcomes, rather than asking people to be owners of something that's important to our organizations. That, if you believe Daniel Pink's work, that leads to less motivation, which is going to lead to less engagement.
Yeah. And on that, Scott, do you think companies are underestimating the cost of poor engagement?
I think inevitably the answer is yes. I also think it's dangerous to paint with a really broad brush, right? Some companies are very present to the impact of engagement, and some aren't. Towers Watson did a study that suggests that fully engaged employees tend to produce 16% more than they are paid. Fully disengaged employees, and remember from Gallup, 31% of the population, the world's work population, is engaged. So we've got 69% that are somewhere on the disengagement. Fully disengaged employees tend to produce only 60% of what they're paid. So we lose 0.4 of a full body, 40% for every fully disengaged person we have. Those are people that we're paying in our organizations who are not producing. And that's a part of that $1.1 trillion price tag as well.
Yeah. And how can AI-driven insights help managers better understand their team, productivity?
That's a great question, and it starts with role design. One thing that Propulsion AI does, when we built the Propulsion AI platform, we built it so that it was delivering an experience to the manager. And the experience is this guided questioning that provokes the manager's thinking and helps them really focus on what they want. Now, if we stopped there, we believe that's a tremendous value, because a manager who has truly thought through a role is a talent magnet. When top-tier talent comes in front of that manager who truly understands how the role fits strategy, what the outcomes are, how they're going to be measured, what the learning and growth path is for that role, how they're going to manage their performance, that top talent, they gravitate toward that. And equally, but in the opposite direction, managers who have not thought that through, talent runs away from them, and they do it silently, and they don't always tell you the truth. They say, I have another opportunity. The reality is they figured out that you hadn't really been thoughtful about the role. So, where we built this platform was really to help managers think. And as sort of joined but ancillary benefit, we also do all the writing for you. The platform writes the job description for you, but after this thought-provoking conversation has taken place, writes the posting for you, writes social content for you, writes interview guides for you. But the addition of AI does a couple of things. It allows the manager to work when and where they want. It extends and creates bandwidth for the recruiters and the HR team. It gets to much deeper, more meaningful, profound content. And it does, in what it takes recruiters 4 to 6 hours to do, it does in as little as 15 minutes.
Yeah. We often hear about the importance of culture fit in hiring. How can we redefine that term to serve both employees and...
Transparency is the number, one thing that candidates are looking for. I think it was, and I'll have to check this for you on the citation. I think it was Insight Global that did a study that said that 72% of managers believe that the way that they've described the role is clear, but only 36% of candidates agree. That's half, right? That's a very stark difference between what we think is being transparent about the role and what isn't. Culture is a word that we use, regrettably, I think. We've used it to mean so many different things that it's almost lost its meaning. But at its heart, the simplest definition of culture is an understanding of what is expected. And when you have that expectation or that clarity about that, then the reality matches your expectation. When that transparency has been presented, then you come in with an expectation that matches what's actually going on, what's actually expected. And beyond, foosball tables and beanbag chairs and company perks, what employees really want is they want meaningful work, and they want to understand what is expected of them as they deliver that, and they want flexibility. Especially now, as we get Gen Z entering the workplace, the desire for flexibility has gone up. And so we think clarity more than culture is going to start to dominate the workplace. And there are factors within culture that I think are going to continue, but I think clarity more than anything is going to start to define this.
Yeah. Scott, in this scenario, you have a manager, a leader comes to you and say, "Hey, Scott, I tried. I can't engage my team. I cannot motivate them. I can't push the team to finish a task." What is your first, I would not say reaction to...
Well, Sid, I have to hedge a little bit because there are so many things that could be affecting that scenario. This is one of the reasons that I like people operations, that I like HR, because these are complex subjects. They're puzzles, and they have a million different pieces. So the right reaction to a manager who comes with that kind of question is to ask additional questions and to try and understand the dynamic that's happening. For the sake of brevity and for the sake of trying to get an answer to your question, I start looking at what are you actually asking people to do, and do they understand why it's important? People want to do a good job. They most of them come to work and they are motivated to succeed until we get in the way. And one of the principal things that gets in the way is this lack of clarity. Do you understand my expectations? Do you understand why those expectations are important? And do you understand when you fulfill those, what happens to our organization? I think that's the first place you got to look. Now, I think that's important in part because delivering that has been historically hard, and it's why we created Propulsion AI, because it makes that clarity a lot easier through the design of the role. The next thing is, the manager who has to constantly monitor the tasks does not have the time to think about how to help the people to succeed. And so, in part, the reason we think that the shift from task focus to outcome focus is important is that encourages autonomy. The more autonomous the individuals are, the more bandwidth the manager has to think about longer term objectives. How am I growing this individual for future needs that are going to present themselves? How am I helping them develop in their career for their own satisfaction? How am I ensuring that the work of these three people fits together to do what I need it to do? Those are questions that if the manager has to micromanage, they rarely have time to address. And so by creating clarity up front in terms of role expectations and by helping people to be focused on outcomes and giving them autonomy, that manager creates bandwidth for themselves. And I think through that, they can answer some of the questions that you're posing in your hypothetical.
Yeah, nice. What are the biggest hiring mistakes companies still make now?
Comparing one candidate to another candidate rather than to an objective standard. The reason that that's such a mistake, Sid, is that it opens you up to bias. Whether that is recency bias, I like the one that I saw most recently, whether it is a bias that I'm reflecting, I like you as a candidate because I see a part of myself in you, right? When I start comparing one person to another person, it opens up the doors wide for a biased selection process. The way to cure that mistake is to be very, very clear about what we're looking for, how it connects to organizational results, and why that's important. And then also, and we built these, Propulsion AI builds key performance indicators and key results into the design of the role, along with competencies and skills. And what that allows us to do is to have a very objective look at each candidate. So we might say, and this is a technique that I wish more organizations would adopt, and I think using the spec that comes from Propulsion AI, they will, is, group one your focus is going to be how the candidate's past experiences relate to the future outcomes. Group 2, you're going to think about skills and technical knowledge. Group 3, you're going to think about competencies and behaviors. Group 4, you might be thinking about leadership, right? Mm-hmm. That kind of breakdown and very specific assignments are only possible when you have a detailed spec. But once you have that, now we start to say, how closely does this candidate match that spec? Next, how closely does this candidate match that spec? And what we ultimately wind up selecting is the best fit to the design of that role. That is going to not only reduce bias, but it's going to increase quality of the person that we select, rather than saying, I just like this person better than I like that person. That is not connected to organizational outcomes.
Yeah, it's clear. Another scenario for you. If you had to redesign the hiring process from scratch, how would you do it, Scott?
Well, we are. We are. And the
Elaborate
broader vision that we have. Yeah, right. So the broader vision that we have for Propulsion AI really doesn't stop with role design. It starts there, but it continues into selection and into onboarding and into performance management, because all of those together are really what helps, one, people feel good about their careers, feel productive about the work that they do, and helps the organization move forward. And put those three together, and that is a win-win-win scenario. So organizations that are wanting to be thoughtful need to start with the mindset of the manager. Do you have an outcomes-focused mindset? Are managers thinking about, I need to add a person to my team to do things, or I have results that I need, and I'm going to design a role that helps me achieve those results? Those are two mindsets.
Yeah.
We think you need the latter. Second is the selection process, as I just described, right? It needs to be broken down. It needs to be targeted and specific. It needs to be built around the design of the role. And we need to be comparing candidates to other candidates. Mm-hmm. Now, something that's missing right now, if I go out and let's say I design a really well thought through role, and I have a really well-written posting, both of which Propulsion AI is going to deliver for you. I put that posting out on the web. I have a new problem. And that problem is called 500 applicants. And the reality today is that a human recruiter cannot deal with 500 applicants.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons that you hear such horror stories about ghosting candidates. And I applied for a job and nobody ever talked to me. And they started to talk to me and then they just stopped talking to me, right? Human recruiters can't handle the volume. And we believe in Propulsion AI that we've got a very novel way of approaching that solution that will allow us to use artificial intelligence to better screen candidates without bias, with much lower bias than we have in the human system today, and ultimately be able to find a better match to that spec, which means that the candidate we do bring in is going to be fully ready to tackle and achieve those outcomes that were a part of that role design. And the last problem, once we have somebody in the organization, we've got to think about how to better manage them. That means that the process of one-on-ones between bosses and their direct reports has to fundamentally shift. We think that there's a 4-part formula for that. How are you doing against the results that we agreed? How are you doing in terms of how you're showing up, your behaviors and competencies? What's your learning and growth path, and how are we helping you to grow and develop in your role and beyond your role? And what can I do differently as a leader to help support you in getting the results that we agreed you were going to get?
Yeah.
And that process needs to change. We think we've got a very unique application of artificial intelligence to solve that problem. And beyond that, the purpose of those one-on-ones is not just check-ins. It should also be to provide feedback ultimately about the performance of that individual in the role. And that tends to be another really onerous process for managers, is writing a meaningful and compelling and helpful performance review. And we think we've got a very good and novel application of artificial intelligence to that problem as well. So, organizations need to think about each one of those components if they are redesigning their process. And that starts with the selection process, obviously.
Really interesting. I'm trying to digest and absorb and digest in the same time what you're saying. How do you ensure AI-driven decision-making doesn't reinforce biases which you talked about earlier
Yeah.
instead of
A big question that we get asked all the time is why not just use ChatGPT? Why would we choose a system like Propulsion AI versus just going to ChatGPT and using ChatGPT? And there are a variety of reasons, but one of them is that, large language models, generic large language models, are trained on the internet.
yeah,
And as a result, that body of information contains good examples of things and horrible examples of things. And it's all mashed up into one bucket. And that's what the system is trained on. And what systems, generic LLMs like ChatGPT do is they do a better job of cutting and pasting. That is going to load things up with bias. A system like Propulsion AI, to your question about reducing bias, is a human in the loop system. We use artificial intelligence to provoke and draw out the thinking of the manager in a way that is not biased because it's outcomes focused. And so, the handoff and sort of trying to cast off some of these tasks to artificial intelligence is going to actually lead to more bias. And the use of a system like Propulsion AI, we believe, because of the way we designed it, is the first step toward reducing bias. The more objective you can make something, the less opportunity for bias exists.
yeah. And within the system, have you seen or do you believe sometimes there are some ethical challenges?
Well, there are always ethical challenges with the use of any tool. There are appropriate ways to use the tool, and there are inappropriate ways. I mean, I can go buy the very best hammer at a hardware store, and I can use the claw end to try and hammer something and get a result that is not what I want, which is probably going to be a lot of bent nails, right? But I can take that exact same hammer, use it in an appropriate and ethical way, and get a very good result out of it. And so, I don't think that the ethical considerations are a function as much of the tool, although there are some concerns about how training data and how large language models in particular understand the world that need to be addressed. But I think a lot of it is how we use the tools.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking that because lately, quite often we hear when it comes about regulating AI or trying work on new policies and regulations to be ahead of the curves in terms of AI nonsense. But there is one thing that all the time come in this kind of discussions. It's ethic. Yeah, and this is the reason I asked that question about if do you believe there is ethical challenges where businesses can face when integrating AI into hiring and management?
I know that, obviously, this is a big topic of discussion right now, what the European Union is doing to think about the guardrails around this. And we're having a similar discussion in the United States. I think there's something that's important to point out, which is that, good regulation should also be outcomes focused. It should be less prescriptive.
You're right. Yeah.
Because we don't want to take away the opportunity to innovate within that space. This is exactly the mindset that we're trying to build and that Propulsion AI helps managers with, is this outcomes thinking, right? This is the result that I want. Experiment a little bit with the tactics that are going to help me get there. The outcome is not negotiable. The path to get there might be a little flexible. That's the kind of innovation that we want to drive in. And I think sensible regulation follows that same mantra, right? These are the guardrails. These are the outcomes that we want to ensure are produced. And we're going to leave some gray space for the market to experiment and for people to innovate ways of getting to those outcomes safely, ethically, and without bias.
Yeah, yeah. Scott, in your opinion, what does the workplace of the next, let's say, 5, 10 years?
I think we're going to see a strong movement towards skills. We're already seeing that. This is not genius level thinking on my part. It's a reflection of what I think a lot of great, thinkers are pointing to right now. I think we're going to see the need for increased autonomy because we're seeing pressure already for greater efficiencies. And if you have a bloated management structure, one of the reasons you likely have that bloated management structure is you are not trusting your employees, one of the reasons you may not be trusting your employees is you have not designed their roles for accountability and initiative. So I think we're going to see the move toward, the need for greater autonomy, greater initiative, greater accountability. I think we're going to see a move toward a focus on skills rather than thinking about job titles. I think we're going to start to think about collections of skills that are going to be necessary. And, I think the workplace as we move forward into 25 and 26 obviously is going to be heavily reliant on additional automation and artificial intelligence and processing.
Yeah. How will AI leadership and decision making at the executive level? Because we're talking about applying AI, applying innovation, applying tech to optimize, improve the hiring, retention within your field. But then let's take it later or at the top, decision making. How do you see leaders embracing and using the technology to make the right decisions?
Let me go back to the historical examples that I gave you as a guide, Sid. You think about the calculator. What did it do? It sped up the rate of calculations that could be made. If you look at the spreadsheet, the early spreadsheets, and even more so as spreadsheets evolved, we got to the point where you could just plug a number in and 50 calculations would be redone for you, right? And what's the value of that? The value is being able to see farther down the road faster. One of the things that technology does really, really well is, identifying and classifying things, vision systems that are able to identify and then group, large data set processing. These kinds of things lead to better insights and better foresight. And I think that's going to be the major impact of artificial intelligence at the executive level, is that the functional units are going to be able to deliver greater insights with larger data sets that are more detailed. And as a result, executives are going to have a different kind of ability to steer the ship than they've had previously.
Yeah. What should organizations be doing right now to prepare for the future of?
Think about their people first. Think about the processes and structures. Think about management mindsets, because all accomplishments ultimately come through people. They use tools like Propulsion AI, but the accomplishments come through people. And so I think, to prepare for the future, I think, organizations got to be thinking about how to maximize the bandwidth of each of their managers, how to maximize the bandwidth of their service units like recruiters and HR professionals. Give them the tools that they need to do that. Shift the management paradigm slightly to what you and I have been talking about around outcomes rather than tasks, because that creates the fertile ground for mastery, autonomy, purpose, and it creates the opportunity for initiative and accountability.
Yeah. Earlier, we spoke about the fear of using AI for the sake of are there specific roles that AI will never, ever be able to replace fully?
I have learned, Sid, and I know you're smiling when you ask that question, but you and I both know the word never is a bad word as much as the word always is a bad word, right? Yeah. And I can tell you agree with the joke that I'm trying to make. I don't know, man. I am... I worked for a while at a think tank in Silicon Valley called Singularity. And I had the great fortune of being around great thinkers like Peter Diamandis, who's the founder of the X Prize and is a serial entrepreneur of high-tech, forward-thinking, new age companies. Ray Kurzweil, one of the original Googlers and futurist, who's got about I think if I get this right, he's got about an 80% success rate in making predictions about the future. And I got the great fortune of being around these people. And one thing I learned from them is, technology is progressing at an exponential pace. So the things that we think will never be done with technology today are going to come faster and faster than we have seen them come in the past. That is for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Let's shift gear slightly to another topic. The past couple of days, a week, the hype and the talk everywhere is about DeepSeek, the Chinese solution. And it feels like we are witnessing a boxing match in the ring. USA on one hand, China on the other hand. Couple of maybe last week, the new US administration announced 500 billion US dollar investment, which is a trio between SoftBank, Oracle, and OpenAI. Couple of days later, all the focus is shifting towards China. And then the talk is about whoever will lead this race will be of the world. What's your opinion? What's your position, Scott?
I don't know whether I'm qualified to
Okay.
weigh in on who's going to be the leader of the world. Yeah. I mean, I think this is exactly what we want to see.
That's the beauty podcast. Open.
I guess, but I also like to be accurate, and I like to be thoughtful about stuff. So I don't know who is going to be the leader of the world, but I do know that, what we're watching is the market innovating. And what we're seeing is, the movement from a handsaw to, a chainsaw. And we're just seeing that movement in very rapid succession. And I think that's a very good thing. Sam Altman said the companies that are the smartest companies are the ones who are betting on us to succeed, because we're going to give them a better tool set on which they can build their businesses. And that's what we're trying to do at Propulsion AI. We use multiple large language models as a part of what we've built in Propulsion AI. And we built the system so that we can plug and play these models, so that as they evolve and each one becomes increasingly more powerful than the previous, we can draw on those and take advantage of the benefits that they offer, combined with the proprietary features that we've built into Propulsion AI.
Thanks. Let's talk about leadership from your own experience, your journey, Scott. What would it be if you could give your younger self one piece of leadership advice?
I think it would be understand that the work of leading is lonely and dangerous, but worthwhile, if the end you are leading toward is to create something better for other people. But the process of getting there is going to be lonely and a little dangerous. There's another book on the bookshelf from an author. He's a Harvard professor named Ron Heifetz. He and his writing partner, Marty Linsky, wrote a book called Leadership on the Line. They have a couple of points that I think are worth bringing out in that book. One is that leadership is a verb, not a noun. You can only see it when it is being exercised, and the people who exercise it can do so independent of a title or of authority. It is the act of pushing an organization to evolve at a rate that it can absorb, that gentle pressure. But organizations resist, and people resist, and that's where it gets a little dangerous. And you have to be willing to say, look, first of all, my intention is one of trying to create benefit for the organization and the people. Second, yes, I'm going to get attacked and I'm going to get resisted, but I'm going to continue that gentle pressure. And that can be a lonely thing where you feel like you're all alone doing it. But if you are doing it for the right reasons, it's a valuable thing. And so I think that would be the lesson I would give myself.
Do you believe leadership is a skill that can be developed, or it is something people are naturally born with?
Both and. I would love to think that, golf is a skill that I could learn. The sad thing is I'm very bad at it, but I continue to try. And there are some people that are naturally good at it, right? And I think that's an analogy that I would apply equally to leadership. There are some people who understand the mechanics of leadership in a more innate way, but there are definitely techniques that can be taught. This focus that we've been talking about, the shift of mindset from tasks to outcomes, is one of those skills. It is a mental model. It requires, just like athletic conditioning, it requires mental conditioning to do, but it is possible to do. So I think some people just do it more naturally than others, but I think you can learn it.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's more than I think. You can observe people who have learned how to become leaders,
And in your
highly
field,
effective leaders.
yeah, and in your field, Scott, how do you personally stay ahead of the curve in a field that's evolving so rapidly?
If you're talking about my field now as artificial intelligence, man, I tell you what, every day that I'm not reading something or watching,
Every second.
seriously, I think you're just at risk for falling behind because it's changing so fast. So, a good portion of my day is spent in study, but only to stay just minimally current with the kinds of things that are happening in the world.
Yeah. We spoke earlier about your business model and starting your company. A pivot theme in both startups and leadership. What's been your biggest pivot in business?
I think recognizing when we started out, it was the same kind of trap
I think
that
I
we're
hear
trying
the
to
dog.
keep managers out of. Can you hear him?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, he's a big boy. I wish I could turn the camera. He's 175 pounds.
Love dogs, man.
And
I have two here.
yeah, he is standing right over here, and he is looking at me like, "How about some food?"
Yeah.
So the same trap that we fell into, or that we're trying to keep managers out of, I think we fell into slightly. It was very easy for us to get focused on the job description, and when we initially created the company, we thought of it very much as a tool to just write documents. What we realized along the way and where we pivoted is that the value wasn't in the document. It matters less to an organization whether you have a job description that's updated or not. You can have a totally out-of-date job description. If the individual is clear about what is expected, they're going to perform differently. If the manager is clear about what they are expecting, they are going to manage differently. That clarity was the pivot. That clarity led us to this notion of role design, and the provocation of thought was really what was the principal value that Propulsion AI was going to deliver. And as an asterisk, we also do the documentation for you. And really well, by the way, but it is an asterisk.
Yeah. Scott, how can leaders foster an agile structured organization?
Start small, I think, right? Regardless of how large the organization is, there are always dynamics that you can create at a team level and at an individual level. And I hate to sound, Sid, like a broken record, but these concepts I think are so foundational to success that they're worth repeating. The manager who thinks about the role in outcomes terms creates the opportunity for the individual to innovate. That is going to create nimbleness and resiliency. Resiliency in the sense that the expectation is that I'm going to experiment with the tactics as long as I'm trying to do it in service of the outcome. That allows me to try, fail, jettison, learn, try again. That same model from startup thinking is exactly what we want on the teams. And then satisfaction and engagement comes from having a purpose, in part, comes from having a purpose. And so that focus on the outcomes is what sets you up for nimbleness.
Yeah. If a leader listening to this podcast could only take one action today to future-proof their team, what should it be, Scott?
Mindset matters. Take the one that I've said a couple of times. Get off of tasks, get onto outcomes. Whether you use a tool like Propulsion AI to make that process easy for you, or whether you do it on your own, that mental model is massively important to your future success. Take that one thing.
Okay. What would, if you had to make a bold prediction about AI and the future of leadership?
A bold prediction. I'm making a prediction, and that is that a lot of the activity that we do in HR right now is going to go away, and it is going to be performed by artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is going to help you write the design of the role. It's going to help you screen your candidates. It's going to algorithmically predict who's going to succeed. It's going to keep those candidates in the loop. It's going to help you bring people more effectively into organizations. It's going to help you collect details about their performance that are meaningful for their growth, and it's going to help leaders give better feedback. Those are things that humans are doing today, and I think every single one of those is going to be done by technology more effectively and with less bias than humans are doing it today. Now, what that creates the opportunity for is for humans to reinvent and innovate new ways of delivering value. And just like the Lotus 1-2-3 example, where financial professionals needed to release the old way of delivering value and migrate to new ways, they didn't understand those new ways, as we don't understand some of the ways that HR professionals will deliver value in the future. But we will deliver value. The profession is not going away. It is going to be augmented by technology, and humans are going to deliver at a new and different level than we had before.
Fantastic. All right, Scott, we're wrapping up with the quick lightning round. Short answers,
Yes, sir.
No overthinking. Ready for speedy
I'll try.
Q&A?
Yes, sir.
Let's do it. What's the best book you've read recently?
Best book I've read recently. I'll go to Leadership on the Line. Probably the best book on leadership I've ever read.
Fantastic. Morning person or a night owl?
Both, because I'm a founder. So I get up at 4:30. I go for a 10K run every single morning, and I finish at night late by doing tasks that are follow-up from the day. So I'm both.
Fantastic. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Coffee. One piece of tech you can't live without?
Claude from Anthropic.
Best leadership advice you've ever...
Don't be the smartest person in the room.
A leader you admire? Past or present?
John McCain.
If you could have a dinner with a historical figure, who would it be and why?
Martin Luther King. And I think the reason was for him to take the position that he took on nonviolence, it was counterintuitive. He stood against everybody, even people who agreed with him and wanted the same things. He stood alone in pursuing something that was of value to humanity, and he believed in it so strongly that he was willing to be the only one, possibly, who said it. He was also willing to suffer great penalties for what he believed, and I have a ton of questions to ask him.
Fantastic. What productivity?
Oh, color my calendar. You should see my calendar. First of all, every moment of the day, Sid, is on my calendar. And I color code it. But I get the ability to look back over my week and really ask myself tough questions about how I've spent my time, and it makes it very visual.
Yeah, a maximum I can color code is 3 colors, no more. I go.
I have like 18.
It drives me crazy. Favorite way to unwind after a long day or a long week?
Virtual reality poker.
Ooh. Okay. Most memorable travel destination?
Running with the Bulls, Pamplona, Spain.
What motivates you to keep innovating?
The absolute fear that I'm going to fall behind and become somebody who is irrelevant.
Okay. I hope you sleep. You sleep.
I like sleep too.
Yeah. If not HR, what career would you have pursued?
Gosh, I mean, Sid, I was a police officer in the city of Los Angeles. I was a working actor in Hollywood. Okay. I mean, I've had a bunch of different careers that are really non-standard. I think if I was going to go back now, it would probably be something in product. I love the creation process. I love understanding how people derive value and what things are important to them, and how we would create products that are, meaningful to their lives.
Favorite sports team?
Roll Tide, Alabama football, American.
Okay. Sports player.
Ooh, favorite sports player. Wow.
Come on.
Kobe Bryant.
Yes.
Kobe Bryant.
What's a hobby or interest you have that might surprise people?
Well, the surprise people is the part. I don't know. I'm a former marathoner. I'm not in danger of winning a major marathon, but I ran a decent time, for me, which was about 3 hours and 30 minutes. And so I spent a lot of time running. I don't know whether that surprises anybody. That part kind of throws me, but that's a big hobby for me.
Scott, what are you the most grateful for?
My journey as a founder has revealed to me the basic goodness of people who I don't know, who are willing to do favors and try and contribute, who ask for nothing in return. And I am motivated by that when I think about the generosity that I've been a recipient of, because it makes a difference. Mm-hmm. And it's just, I get slightly emotional about it because people are just basically good and they want to help, and I'm really thankful for that because it's made a difference in our company.
Nice. And lastly, if you have to give a piece of advice or wisdom to our listeners on any topic,
check your motivations. I think you got to start with, for anything that you do, you got to start with, why am I doing it? What am I trying to deliver to the world? How am I making things better? Or is that even important to me? I think being in possession of an understanding about what motivates you to do what you're doing changes the way you do everything, and I think for the better.
Scott, this has been an incredible conversation. Thank you for sharing your insights, experience, and vision for the future of work. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been mine. So thank you so much for having me on. I'll say it again. I was truly honored by your invitation. I was happy to be here with you.
And before we conclude, can you tell our listeners where they can contact you, learn more about your work, or connect with you online?
Absolutely. So LinkedIn is usually the best way to connect with me. If you go to linkedin.com/in/M, Scott M, you'll find my profile. And then if you want to find Propulsion AI on the web, it's getpropulsion.ai. Getpropulsion.ai. We allow you to try the product free. You can sign up on the web, no credit card up front. We're true believers that if we've created a product that's good enough, you will take care of the sign up later. We open the door for you. Come on in, do as many as you want, experience it for yourself.
Fantastic. And I want to leave our listeners with a powerful quote from Peter Drucker, widely regarded as a father of modern management. His work transformed businesses' thinking and laid the foundation for today's management practices. He once said, "The best way to predict the future is to create it." And that's exactly what Scott is doing, leveraging AI and leadership to shape the future of work. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to our Pre-Zero Sports Talk podcast. Your support helps us bring you more insightful conversation with the game-changing leaders. Until next time, stay curious, inspired, and lead the way. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.